Hello everybody and welcome back to another book review here on the channel, where today we're going to be talking about The Lesser Devil, the second book in the Suneater series, depending on how you count it. It's a novella that takes place between book 1 and book 2. It's 1.5, at least that's what the official listing says. And you've probably already noticed that instead of having several sections, this video just has 2. That's because I normally do like a halfway through reading stop. With a novella, that's not really an option because halfway through is like 40 pages, and I didn't really want to stop and give my thoughts on like 40 pages. So instead, we're going to be doing just a spoiler-free section, followed up by a spoiler-filled section, and keep the discussion rolling. So buckle on up as we continue on our Suneater journey. And to the couple people who started reading Suneater with me after my Empire of Silence review, who also just realized there's another book they're supposed to read between books 1 and 2. I made that mistake as well. I started Howling Dark, got about 20% of the way through it, and then a helpful member of the audience was like, hey, don't miss 1.5, it's rather important. And you certainly can, from what I can tell where I'm at in the series right now, just go to book 2 right away. But I agree, The Lesser Devil 1.5 does add a little bit of emotional impact in good and bad ways. Let's go ahead and get into the setup here. So this book is a pretty substantial change from both of the other Suneater books I have started because, well, it's not in the first person. Instead, we are following Hadrian's brother Crispin in the third person, which makes complete sense within the context of the story because we are no longer in Hadrian's narrative recounting his adventure, and instead we are just following his brother. So on a meta narrative level, it makes complete sense.
A new way of looking at
like
stuff.
a whole new point of view.
I would say, unfortunately, my biggest piece of critical feedback to this novella is that clearly Christopher Racchio is a stronger writer in the first person. He's just a lot more visceral, a lot more emotional. He's really able to get me into the head of Hadrian. And while granted, some of that is certainly due to difference of length of story, just on a technical level, I didn't enjoy this one on the immersion level as I did with the 2 other now Suneater books I've experienced, but that's not too big of a ding because this does make up for that in some other ways. Now we're following Crispin in the time after Suneater where Hadrian is no longer in Crispin's life, keeping it spoiler free. It is clearly still haunting Crispin. He's really bothered by his brother's absence, and we get a perspective from Crispin that I feel like if you paid attention reading Empire of Silence, you understand, like you kind of figured that, you know, the younger brother is looking up to his smaller but older brother, and from Hadrian's perspective before, you could put yourself in Crispin's shoes and see that he was a brother who, while he comes across like a bit of a brute, is still wanting to get along with his older brother. He's still going through the same emotional like distance from his father and mother that Hadrian did. And so it's just getting the other side of the coin, and it's certainly The Lesser Devil makes Crispin more sympathetic as a character, and largely because he's growing. This is a story about him growing, him realizing some things about himself, and I liked that. It was a bit blunt. I think it could be argued that it took away some of the mystery of Crispin's character, and now I'm not as interested as seeing the future of his character in the series as I was before in some ways. Yet in others, I am now excited to see if he'll come into the main narrative again, how that'll play in, because remembering Hadrian as a character, I don't know if Hadrian's going to be open to Crispin's growth that we're seeing. Like it sets up a future conflict that I hope we see cranked up, because one of the flaws of Hadrian, and one of the ones that's really put into the text here, is that he's arrogant, and he's still arrogant where I've left off with him in Howling Dark. I don't think he will be comfortable as a character seeing his supposedly younger brother having changed and grown. But let's get more into the text here, because this story kicks off with Crispin being told by his father that there could be a plot to take him and his sister out.
Watch yourself.
Now Hadrian, we learn, does have a younger sister. That's nice. She's a good secondary character in this story. Her name is Sabine, dyslexia. And the familial consistency through the siblings is one of the most enjoyable aspects to this story, and I think really speaks well to Christopher's work with character, because you are able to see the overt, like pointed out within the narrative, like, oh, that's the smile of the family going through, but also the small things in how they refer to certain people, how they feel towards certain things, and obviously mentalities towards their parents as well. It's very enjoyable to see Crispin and Hadrian's similarities, and even see some of Hadrian in this younger sister who he's never met. There's just still some there because obviously she was brought up in a very similar circumstance to him, and Crispin even remarks that she has a lot more of Hadrian in her than he does in himself. So even on that level, I'm like, oh, Sabine, really interested to see how she will interact with Hadrian if they end up meeting up in the future. And we do see a couple other substantial characters from the first book, Empire of Silence, that were significant characters in Hadrian's life from the first point in the text here again. And obviously, some of them have the advantages of Hadrian's family, where they do not age while others do not. Crispin, still looking young, still looking fresh. He is the younger brother, but he has now been awake and existing for far longer than Hadrian in this world. And then other people have just been aging. And it's nice to see the care for emotional growth and how those people viewed Hadrian or just exist and strike the reader so differently presented to the reader. It's really providing this well-rounded view of the family dynamic and really reassuring me as a reader that that first part of Empire of Silence is certainly going to be coming up in a big way later on in the text and the series, and we're just getting the look behind the curtain of what is happening while Hadrian is in interstellar sleep or behaving in the way he behaves in Empire of Silence. I struggled a bit though with just how much Crispin thinks about Hadrian in this text. It reminds me of a conversation I had about Sunlit Man, where in Sunlit Man, a book by Brandon Sanderson, a character is thinking back a long time, supposedly, but on very important events in their life. And I kind of made the comparison, it's like a World War II veteran decades later is still going to think about World War II.
I remember the war.
And if I apply the same logic here, especially in the situation Crispin's in, I think it does make sense that he thinks about Hadrian a lot, but it started to edge into that territory of Hadrian thinking about Gibson so much as well, where it's just like, how much do these people think about others, especially when they grow, and not just internalize and grow on their own? It feels like very dependent character growth, which might just be a signature of the author or an intentional choice. I can't quite tell yet. But getting into the actual events of the story as much as I can while keeping it spoiler free, this is a surprisingly religious tale. It has heavy religious themes coming in, and keeping it as vague as I can, let's call it Crispin hangs out with the Amish. The Amish of this world, which in the broader context and the setting are actually just Christians. But the way Crispin views them would be how we view the Amish now. They are technologically regressed. He refers them as like peasants. They're plebeians. They are not something that he thinks of as equal due to his heritage, due to his, not that I'm saying I wasn't trying to say I view Amish as not equal. I transitioned into another point, just didn't add the right pause there.
Foot and mouth. This is my bad.
And for a time, I was starting to think, okay, is this going to be like a Crispin finds Jesus tale? But Christopher Racchio was more tactful than that. And it's more of Crispin has his first great cultural clash where he has to immerse himself in another group of people's way of living and try and make sense of it. And if you pay attention to Crispin's character from book one, that's not where he's gonna thrive. And it's outstandingly well executed to see just how different Crispin's handling all of this and finding solution to these problems than Hadrian, while staying believably from the same family, right? It's like the brute and the politician from the same family, the same mentality. I think that is fantastic. And then seeing the brute with his worldviews challenged, it reminded me of the first couple times I traveled abroad. Like if you are someone who has only lived in your state, your country, and you go out of your country and you spend a long amount of time in other people, it really fundamentally changes how you view the world if you pay attention. I have not met a person who has spent substantial time overseas or across borders who doesn't say it has affected them in a major way. And this is Crispin kind of having a crash course of that while staying within the borders of his father's kingdom, which is kind of an interesting angle as well and commentary on how in some ways kind of sheltered Crispin's been. And it would have been too much for me for this story to have turned into a Crispin finds Jesus tale. That's not necessarily where this is going. I think that's certainly planting some seeds that are going to lead to even greater growth and change from Crispin in the future. But it's more Crispin finds a way of viewing the world, a modus operandi that is completely foreign to him. You know, people who are willing to take in those in need purely because it's what their Lord says is right and out of the kindness of their heart. That's an alien concept to Crispin. He has been raised in a cutthroat court setting, and so he's immediately thinking, what do you want? You know, what are you trying to get out of me? And he slowly comes to the realization of like,
concise, even rather eloquent.
And so in hindsight, looking back at the events of Empire of Silence, I go from detesting Crispin. Now with this new perspective, I don't detest him. I view him as foolish and brutish and rash and maybe a bit of a bad person when he was so much younger. But all these decades later, he seems to be someone who is yearning to find purpose, to do better, and make up for the flaws, the lacking within him and his family that has resulted in his family being so split, being so non-trusting. Like, he misses his older brother, and his younger sister kind of even talks about how it's crazy that he thinks like, you know, you're never gonna see Hadrian again, let him go. He's not a point in our life, because he's never been for her. But I don't think Crispin can, because he's not someone who can let go of feelings or scars very easy. And I don't mean that in a vendetta way. In fact, that's a theme here as well. Crispin is not trying to attach himself to that kind of familial baggage of revenge and conflict, yet it's kind of in him. Like, he has this anger, he has this rashness, this lashing out. And so you feel this internal conflict that permeates all of the text, like from the beginning to end. And I think it's what makes Crispin so interesting as a character. He is, in a very human way, in a way that I have encountered with real people in my life, trying to do better while still being deeply flawed. Whereas Hadrian's like, I am better, let me show you, I just need to exercise my brain and I'll make mistakes along the way, but I'm just learning while already being pretty great. Crispin, I feel this like hesitance entering him, which it wasn't too aggressive. It wasn't this kind of thing where you take someone who always been like, bah, I'm a gladiator, and suddenly they're just, you know, stepping on glass and eggshells all the time. Instead of just thrusting his foot down, he takes a firm, cautious step forward. That's the kind of slow, but consistent character work, even within a novella, you can accomplish, and is going to make me interested in the future of a character, even if I don't like a character. But I do like Crispin, not as a person, but as a concept. I think on the actual conflict that occurs within the story, more could have been done. The actual fighting, the resolution relied on a lot of cliches. There are trope-type characters of specific kinds really heavily used in the text here. It's not as smooth a story as Empire of Silence. It very much so feels like a DLC offshoot quest of a game you really love that you pay $5 for, and you get this fun little side thing. You don't regret it, but it's not going to overtake like the main storyline. But it makes you appreciate some characters more, and I have no problem with that whatsoever. I'm going to say this is like a solid 7 out of 10, especially if you like Empire of Silence as much as I do. Do not skip The Lesser Devil, which is a great name in hindsight for this story. Go ahead and check it on out. It's going to be something you can burn through in a day easily. And with how it continues to add to the perspectives existing within the culture and the setting and the world, it really does feel important. It's not a novella that you can skip or just feels like an afterthought from the author. There's care there. It's not as smooth, it's not as polished, but it's certainly worth your time. Okay, let's go ahead and get into spoilers. 3, 2, 1. Crispin fights with the Amish against an old familial enemy. It's interesting, and I say the Amish, but in reality that's not the case. This is just the relic of Christianity, or as they think of them, pagans, ironically, still existing with the Empire, provided some form of asylum, almost like a museum piece under Imperial protection, which ends up coming back to bite the person who attacked Crispin and his family in the ass. An old rivalry from back in the day, rearing its head that Crispin has to take on. What I really liked about this conflict is, one, there's a misdirect that also, informs and has points of its own, but it showcased there wasn't just one solution to this problem. There are several. And if you're smart enough to set up a conflict where, yeah, Crispin has to defend with these technologically inferior people against this bigger, badder threat, and there's a larger assault coming, but you make it realistic, you make it feel like there's several ways out of the solution. I mean, Crispin at one point, I think, could have just off with his sister and not worried about it, and that would have been a mistake. It makes the actual decisions Crispin and his sister make throughout the story feel very important. I think one of my favorite Crispin moments is when he tries to step into the shoes of Hadrian and give a rousing speech, because I was expecting something that would have felt too much, like out of character level rhetoric, but he gives a rousing speech that, like, if you did a D20 roll, it's like a 13.
That was supposed to be more of a rousing speech.
It was enough to make some of the people be like, yeah, all right, we're cool. But it wasn't a Hadrian level, like, stir him up, get him ready for combat. But then the actual battle that occurs really does have a cost. People die. Crispin gets captured at one point, has to surrender himself. This is where the weakest part of the story for me began to happen. The cache of weapons I saw coming, and it was just like, okay, the old cache of weapons being available. I guess you need that to be there just to even be remotely believable that there people are able to put up a fight. I just wish there had been a slightly different creative solution, because it just felt like a moment out of a B movie I've seen 1,000 times over. And then Crispin ends up escaping in a way that kind of just relies on the villain being arrogant, and then there's an excuse provided in the text of, like, Crispin being like, I know the need to, like, want to rub it in the person's face. I didn't necessarily believe that, because this person who's going against Crispin isn't directly mad at Crispin. They're mad at his father, so I don't understand the need to rub it in the child's face. Whatever, it's splitting hairs, and people are going to disagree with me on that. His whole way out of there and the final kind of big fight didn't 100% resonate with me, but it was the very end that I think the themes landed well enough. It wasn't the smoothest, but having Crispin offer this great gift to a religious person who helped him, and then that gift be turned down, like, you can call a lot of this novella coming. Like, I knew as soon as Crispin even thought earlier, like, oh, I need to give this guy this promotion, I was like, he's not going to take it. But it still has meaning. Just because you know something is coming doesn't mean it doesn't have meaning and doesn't successfully land with the character. And we as the reader feel smarter than Crispin. Anyone's gonna feel smarter than Crispin reading this book. But again, intentional. As long as it's done with intent, I don't mind that. And watching his handling of these moments and these final thoughts on Hadrian, this offer of prayer that's given, it's really tactful. It's really nice. As someone who's not particularly religious, I don't want to see authors shy away, whether they're religious or not. I don't know whether or not Christopher is, from bringing in those ideas, because they are so human. As someone who isn't religious, I am jealous of faith. I've said that before a bunch of times, and I think that same foreign feeling for Crispin, where he's seeing these people have their religious practices. Christianity at this point is 20,000 plus years old. It's something where he clearly doesn't have respect, but he has some kind of curiosity towards what's captured these people. And it certainly would have felt too far to have him by the end of it be like, praise Jesus. And I also want to give this book credit for backtracking and also acknowledging the harsh reality of this world a little bit, where yes, at first Crispin's offer of the great gift is turned down, but later someone else comes up and is like, no, he'll accept. Because in this world, yeah, it would be absolutely insane to turn down a gift to be literally brought into the life on the level that Crispin gets. And I also want to say it's so delicious at the end to have Crispin be told that his father is kind of just sweeping all of this under the rug for political reasons. Like, his son and daughter are probably horrifically traumatized and just went through something awful. And the first instinct of the family is like, we can't show weakness. Mwah. There is that permeating consistency throughout Suneater, where it's like, you can have thematic, nice moments, but at the end of the day, this world is hard as The end result, though, felt like Crispin was positioned in a way where he had a similar feeling towards religion, Christianity, that I do, where it's like, this seems like it's something that is a relic of the past, not for me, but I respect these people. I respect their ways. I'm not going to just step on them. And that's played up throughout the text, where at first Crispin is like speaking blasphemy to these people and saying like, how dare you say anything that would go against the religion of the empire, which even he, I think to some degree, knows is entirely bullshit. So once he's finally at a later point being like, yeah, you can just call me by my name. Like, I'm not gonna have you beaten for that. It worked. Like, it's a great success. And it's certainly difficult as a writer to write a character of lesser intelligence, coming to conclusions like this, having realizations that don't come across as condescending. And it just feels like you, the reader, are walking along with the author as this person who's a little bit slower. I'm not trying to say Crispin's a total moron or anything. He's just someone who does take a little bit longer to process, and he's very stuck in his ways. He hasn't been exposed to these things, so he's at a disadvantage as well. We get to watch a obvious process with him, but it's still an enjoyable process to watch. And then the greater implications, especially because I've read a little bit of Howling Dark, of how these wider ideas being put in a member of Hadrian's family's mind could come in later, whether or not Crispin ends up finding Jesus or just being softer, more open-minded, a kinder version of himself. Once Hadrian steps back in, I really am looking forward to see how that's gonna go, because Crispin did not leave the best impression with his brother. The last thing Hadrian ever did was punch him in the fucking face and knock him unconscious. And now Crispin knows that his mother helped Hadrian escape through the love interest that wasn't really a factor for Hadrian. And we get confirmed, did not like Hadrian in that way at all, which I thought was a nice thing to put in there as well. Like, no, Hadrian, she's not into you. You were right when you thought that. She's older now. Leave her be. I enjoy seeing that idea, that growth for Crispin, because it means we're not going to feel like when these two interact with each other again, they're just picking right up from that conflict. And instead, Crispin's grown and going to be wiser and come in with hopefully what seems like just a wanting to reconnect. He really misses Hadrian, and I haven't seen the same from Hadrian. So in a strange flip, I'm now as a reader kind of thinking like, is Hadrian going to come across as the brute? I don't think so, but there's a small part of me that's like, I think Hadrian's going to be the dick, which I wouldn't have called. The biggest surprise is all this said and done. At the end of this story, I disagree with Hadrian. I now want to see Crispin take over his father's rule. I don't think he'll be a good ruler. His doubts he expresses in himself in this story, I actually didn't really pick up in Empire of Silence, and it was nice to see. But his sister seems a bit naive. I don't think she's the right person to inherit it, and Crispin showed me that he's someone who is willing to still grow and evolve as a person, despite him age-wise being fully an adult, which is really something I think lacks in great leaders. So I don't think he'll be a great leader, but he could have aspects of a great leader. Hadrian would probably be a better one overall, but I think it would be more obnoxious to work for Hadrian than Crispin. I don't know if that's the case or not, but it's what I'm feeling. I don't know if I'm glad that I got to see all this from Crispin. I certainly enjoyed it. I went into this story thinking to myself constantly, is this needed? As a novella, do I need to learn this information, or would it be better for it to kind of stay subtle in the background of Hadrian's perspective? But as soon as I kind of actually turned that off and just realized, am I enjoying this story? Is this like something I'm having a good time reading? I started liking The Lesser Devil a lot more. So keep that in mind when you get into it. Not everything does it come down to, does this need to be told to me? Because yeah, you could text crawl equivalent it in a book down the road in Suneater, where we get this growth from Crispin. Yeah, it could accomplish some of the same stuff as we just kind of blowed out a book down there. But here, a lot's done for this character. Some of it, maybe I would have preferred it stay in the background. But at the end of the day, I had a good time with this story, and that's all it needed to be. Good job. But let me know your thoughts on The Lesser Devil in the comments down below. I'll have links so you can check out the first book in Suneater, which we are going to be plowing through in these next couple of weeks as well. And like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And have a good one, y'all. Peace.